Everyone knows the Vikings mastered the ocean. That's the story we were given. But there is a people whose bodies literally evolved for the sea. Not trained, not adapted through culture, but genetically rewired after thousands of years of open ocean habitation. Their spleens are 50% larger than any other human population on Earth. That is not a metaphor. That is a 2018 peer-reviewed study in one of the most cited journals in biology. The people it describes are the Bashau, from the Philippines and Borneo. And the history books spent 4 centuries calling them pirates. So how does that happen? How does a civilization that literally evolved for the ocean end up written into history as the villains of the sea they always owned? That is the question this video is going to answer. And the answer is going to change how you think about who gets remembered and why. First, let's be honest about the Vikings. They were genuinely remarkable. Open ocean crossings with no instruments, settlement of Iceland and then Greenland, trade routes stretching from Scandinavia to Constantinople. Real accomplishment. No one is taking that away. But here is the thing. The standard we are talking about today is not who built the most impressive warship. The standard is this: who made the ocean their home? Who navigated without a single written chart and spread a language family across half the planet? Who lived, traded, and raised families on open water for generation after generation? That standard belongs to a completely different story. And it does not start in Scandinavia. It starts in Taiwan, 5,000 years ago. A single ancestral population began moving outward from Taiwan. Not a military force, not a colonial fleet, just communities of people in wooden boats, reading stars and ocean currents and the behavior of birds. They reached Madagascar to the west. They reached Easter Island to the east. The total maritime spread across open ocean covered roughly 24,000 kilometers, which is approximately the full circumference of the Earth at the equator. Once around the planet, in wooden boats, without compasses, without metal tools, without a single written chart. This is what historians call the Austronesian expansion, and genetic studies from Harvard and the Max Planck Institute have directly traced Philippine island populations to this exact origin point. The DNA confirms it. The linguistic evidence confirms it. This happened, and it remains one of the least taught stories in any standard history classroom in the Western world. Ask yourself why. Now zoom in. Pull the frame from civilizational scale down to one specific object, the Lipa-Lepa. This is the traditional Bajau houseboat, and it is worth understanding what it actually was, because it was not a ship in any sense that a European mariner would recognize. It was built without nails, held together entirely by interlocking wooden joinery. Inside that 8 to 12 meter hull, you had a raised sleeping platform, a cooking area, and a storage hold deep enough to carry weeks of supplies. Rainwater collection was built into the design. Fish came from the water directly below. Interboat trade handled everything else. The Lipa-Lepa did not need a port. It did not need a harbor. It did not need land at all, except occasionally for trade or burial. European ships of the same era were sophisticated instruments of navigation, but they were useless without port infrastructure. The Lipa-Lepa needed nothing on land because the boat was not a vehicle for reaching somewhere. It was the destination. Entire family lineages were born on these boats, lived on them, and died on them across dozens of generations. And here is the part that colonial administrators found most threatening about that. The Bajau were not wandering aimlessly. They were running trade networks, linking Mindanao, Borneo, Sulawesi, and the Malay Peninsula, routes that had been operating for over a millennium before any European ship appeared in the region. That network generated real wealth. And when Spanish Manila arrived and tried to impose port taxation and commercial control, there was a problem. The Bajau did not use Spanish ports. They did not need Spanish ports. Their entire commercial system moved across open water, outside the reach of any colonial customs office. So the Spanish colonial administration did what colonial administrations consistently did in exactly this situation. It renamed the activity. The same trade routes that had been legitimate inter-island commerce for over 1,000 years were reclassified the moment they resisted taxation. Trade became piracy. Navigation became raiding. A maritime civilization became a criminal class. This was not a historical description. It was a legal weapon. And every Western source written after that moment inherited the label. The people whose biology proves 1,000-year ocean habitation were entered into the historical record as the villains of the sea they had always owned. And this was not unique to the Bajau. This is a pattern. Malay merchant fleets received identical treatment. Omani traders operating across the Indian Ocean were retroactively labeled pirates when their commercial networks began competing with European interests. The mechanism was consistent. any maritime group that could not be incorporated into colonial port systems was criminalized. But the consequence for the Bajau was especially severe because their civilization left almost no trace that Western historians were trained to recognize. No stone monuments, no written archives, no fixed cities to excavate. Their knowledge was oral. Their technology was a vessel. Their records were the ocean itself. When historians trained on documentary evidence looked at the Bajau, they found an absence. And they read that absence as proof that nothing significant had been there. The absence of evidence was mistaken for evidence of absence. That is how an ocean civilization disappears from the record without anyone having to burn a single document. But here is where the story turns. In 2018, researchers at the University of Copenhagen and UC Berkeley published a study in the journal Cell. They were looking at Bajau divers and comparing them to neighboring non-diving populations across 59 individuals. What they found was not a cultural skill. It was not better training. Bajau spleens were, on average, 50% larger than those of the neighboring population. And the difference was heritable. It was written into the genome. A larger spleen means a significantly increased reservoir of oxygenated red blood cells released into circulation during a dive. That is why Bajau divers can reach depths exceeding 60 meters on a single breath. Not because they practiced more, because thousands of years of ocean habitation selected for bodies that could do it. This is the first documented case in science of a human population developing a heritable anatomical adaptation directly in response to a sustained occupational environment. The scientists went looking for a biological curiosity and found evolutionary proof of a civilization, not recorded in stone, not written on paper, written into the body of every living Bajau descendant on Earth right now. The Viking longship is a symbol because someone decided it should be. It was placed in museums, written into school curricula, made into films. The Lepa Lipa is unknown because someone decided that should be too. But the spleen does not care about colonial legal categories. The genome does not defer to a Spanish administrator's paperwork. History could erase the documents. It could not erase the DNA. If you carry Filipino, Bajau, or broader Austronesian heritage, your ancestors did not survive the ocean. They owned it. And if you don't, you just learned something that most history classrooms will never teach you. Here's the question for the comments. What other civilization do you think got the piracy label when they were actually the rightful owners of the waters they sailed? And share this video, because the algorithm is genuinely not going to surface it on its own.